From the moment a human being is born, a silent process begins to unfold, one that no wealth can stop, no technology can reverse, and no desire can escape. This process is aging. At first it is almost invisible. A child grows taller, stronger, more energetic. Youth appears vibrant, full of promise, full of movement. Yet hidden beneath that appearance, time is already shaping the body in ways we rarely notice. Cells divide, tissues renew themselves, and countless microscopic processes quietly move forward. What we call growing up is already the first stage of growing old. Most people rarely think about aging deeply while they are young. Life feels expansive, and the future seems far away. But as the years pass, subtle changes begin to appear. The body does not recover as quickly from fatigue. The skin loses some of its elasticity. Memory works differently. Energy shifts. These signs may seem small at first, but gradually they reveal something profound. The body we once believed to be stable is actually changing every moment. Across cultures and throughout history, humans have struggled with this reality. Entire industries are built around resisting aging, cosmetics promising eternal youth, medical treatments claiming to slow time, diets and lifestyles designed to extend vitality. Behind these efforts lies a deep psychological impulse, the desire to hold on to what feels pleasant and familiar. Youth represents possibility, beauty, and strength, while aging is often associated with loss, decline, and uncertainty. But more than 2,500 years ago, a radically different perspective emerged through the teachings of Gautama Buddha. Instead of treating aging as an unfortunate accident of life, the Buddha described it as one of the most fundamental realities of existence. In the earliest Buddhist texts, aging is not hidden or softened with comforting language. It is presented clearly, directly, and honestly as part of what the Buddha called dukkha. The word dukkha is often translated simply as suffering, but its meaning is deeper and more subtle. It refers to the inherent unsatisfactoriness of conditioned existence, the fact that everything we rely on is unstable, subject to change, and ultimately unable to provide lasting security. Within this framework, aging is not merely a biological problem. It is a profound expression of the changing nature of reality itself. To understand this, we must look more carefully at what we actually mean when we say, "I am aging." When people speak about aging, they usually refer to the body. They notice wrinkles forming on the skin, hair turning gray, muscles losing strength. It seems obvious that aging belongs to the physical body. Yet according to the Buddha's analysis, the human being cannot be reduced to the body alone. What we call a person is far more complex and dynamic. In Buddhist philosophy, the experience we call self is understood as a temporary combination of processes known as the Five Aggregates. These aggregates are not static things but constantly changing activities that together create the illusion of a stable individual. They include form, which refers to the physical body, feeling, the immediate tone of experience such as pleasure or discomfort, perception, the ability to recognize and interpret the world, mental formations, the habits, intentions, and emotional patterns that shape our behavior, and consciousness, the awareness that arises through our senses and thoughts. According to this view, what we call I is not a single permanent entity living inside the body. Instead, it is the ongoing interaction of these five processes, each arising and fading moment by moment. When we examine life through this lens, aging takes on a much broader meaning. It is not simply the body deteriorating with time. Aging is the gradual transformation of all these processes together. Consider how different you are now compared to 10 or 20 years ago. Your body has changed, certainly, but so have your emotions, your habits, your memories, your ways of thinking. The person you once were exists now only as traces in memory. The cells that formed your body years ago have mostly been replaced. Even the patterns of your mind have shifted through experience, learning, and circumstance. Yet despite all these changes, we still feel a strong sense that there is a continuous me traveling through time. This feeling of continuity is powerful, but it can also be misleading. The Buddha observed that much of our suffering arises from clinging to the idea that there is something stable at the center of this changing process. We believe there is a solid self that should remain young, healthy, and secure. When reality contradicts that belief, when the body ages, when abilities decline, when life's circumstances shift, we feel anxiety, frustration, and fear. But what if the problem is not aging itself? What if the deeper issue lies in our misunderstanding of what we truly are? From the Buddhist perspective, aging is not a mistake in the system of life. It is the natural unfolding of conditioned processes. Everything that arises due to causes and conditions must eventually change as those conditions evolve. A flower blooms beautifully in the morning sunlight, yet by evening its petals begin to fall. The ocean waves rise and dissolve continuously without pause. Seasons shift from spring to summer, from autumn to winter. In the same way, the human body and mind move through phases of development, maturity, and decline. Modern science, interestingly, has begun to reveal insights that resonate with this ancient perspective. At the microscopic level, the human body is not a fixed structure but a vast ecosystem of constantly renewing cells. Every second, millions of cells die and millions more are born. Proteins break down and rebuild themselves. DNA replicates and repairs itself continuously. The body we inhabit today is not the same body we had a decade ago. It is a flowing biological process rather than a permanent object. Yet because these changes occur gradually, the mind creates a sense of stability. We look into the mirror each day and see a familiar face. We remember our past and project ourselves into the future. This continuity gives the impression that there is a solid identity moving through time, when in reality what exists is a stream of transformations. Aging, then, is not an isolated event that begins late in life. It is happening right now, in every breath, in every heartbeat, in every cell dividing within the body. The process began the moment life itself began. Youth is not the opposite of aging. Youth is simply the earliest phase of it. When we begin to see aging in this way, something remarkable happens. Instead of viewing it purely as decline, we start to recognize it as a teacher. Aging reveals the fundamental nature of existence. Everything that arises must change. The body, the mind, our emotions, our relationships, our circumstances, all are moving through cycles of formation and dissolution. The Buddha encouraged his followers to contemplate this reality not with fear, but with clarity. By observing aging carefully, we begin to understand something essential about life. We see that clinging to permanence in an impermanent world inevitably leads to tension and dissatisfaction. But when we accept change as the very fabric of existence, the mind can gradually relax its grasp. This does not mean we become indifferent to life or passive in the face of decline. Rather, it means we develop a deeper wisdom about the nature of our experience. Instead of fighting the unstoppable flow of time, we learn to observe it with curiosity and understanding. And this is where the teaching of the Five Aggregates becomes so powerful. It gives us a framework to investigate aging more carefully, not just as a biological process happening in the body, but as a transformation affecting every aspect of our experience. In the next part of this exploration, we will begin with the first of these aggregates, the physical body itself. By looking closely at what modern biology reveals about cellular decay and regeneration, we may discover something surprising. The body we identify with so strongly is not a stable structure at all. It is an ever-changing field of microscopic events, unfolding every second of our lives. And within that silent world of cells and molecules, the story of aging has already begun. When we begin to look deeply into the nature of aging, the first place we naturally turn our attention is the body. We feel aging in our bones, in our muscles, in the changing texture of our skin. We notice it when our energy fades more quickly than it once did, when recovery takes longer, when movements that once felt effortless now require greater care. It seems obvious that aging belongs to the body. But what exactly is this body that we claim as Mine. What is it truly made of, and why does it inevitably move toward decline? In the teachings of Gautama Buddha, the physical body is understood through the first of the five aggregates, known as rupa. This term is often translated simply as form, but it carries a deeper meaning. It refers to the entire material aspect of existence, the physical body with all its organs, tissues, and structures, as well as the physical world that surrounds it. In this view, the body is not a solid, unchanging entity. It is a temporary arrangement of physical elements that arise due to causes and conditions. To most people, however, the body feels permanent. When we look in the mirror, we see a familiar face that seems to belong to a continuous identity. The mind quietly assumes that this form will remain fundamentally the same. Yet if we look closer, we begin to see that the body is never still. It is not a statue carved in stone. It is more like a river, constantly flowing, constantly renewing itself, moment after moment. Modern biology offers a fascinating window into this hidden world. Beneath the surface of our skin lies an astonishing level of activity. The human body contains tens of trillions of cells, each one performing specialized functions that sustain life. Some cells carry oxygen through the bloodstream, others transmit electrical signals through the nervous system, while countless others repair tissues, fight infection, or regulate the delicate balance of the body's internal environment. But what is most remarkable is that these cells are not permanent. They are constantly being replaced. Skin cells die and are shed every day. Cells lining the stomach renew themselves within days. Even the skeleton, which appears rigid and stable, slowly rebuilds itself through cycles of breakdown and reconstruction. The body you inhabit today is not the same collection of cells that existed years ago. Most of them have already been replaced. If we could see this process with microscopic vision, the illusion of a fixed body would dissolve instantly. We would see cells dividing, aging, and dying in an endless cycle, proteins assembling and disassembling, molecules being transported, recycled, and transformed. Life at this level is not static, it is movement, activity, and change. Yet within this magnificent process lies the quiet origin of aging. Every time a cell divides, it must copy its genetic material, the long strands of DNA that carry the instructions for life. For many years scientists believed this copying process was nearly perfect. But as research progressed, they discovered that each division introduces small imperfections. Tiny errors accumulate. Protective structures at the ends of chromosomes, called telomeres, gradually shorten with every cycle of replication. Over time, the cell's ability to repair itself becomes less effective. Eventually, many cells reach a state known as cellular senescence. In this condition, the cell does not immediately die, but it loses its ability to divide and function normally. It remains present in the tissue but contributes less effectively to the body's maintenance. As more cells enter this state, the body's capacity for renewal begins to decline. This gradual shift manifests in the familiar signs of aging. The skin becomes thinner and less elastic because collagen fibers are produced more slowly. Muscles shrink as regenerative cells lose their strength. Bones become more fragile as the balance between formation and breakdown changes. The immune system becomes less responsive, making the body more vulnerable to disease. All of these changes are not sudden events. They unfold slowly over decades, quietly transforming the physical form we inhabit. And yet, despite the immense complexity of this process, the basic principle is simple. The body is not designed to remain unchanged. It is designed to change continuously. When we reflect on this, the teaching of Rupa becomes strikingly clear. The Buddha described the body as something conditioned, something that arises due to physical causes and eventually dissolves when those conditions can no longer sustain it. In ancient India, long before microscopes existed, he observed that the body is composed of elements: earth, water, fire, and air, symbolizing solidity, fluidity, temperature, and movement. These elements constantly interact and transform. Today, modern science describes these elements in a different language: atoms, molecules, biochemical reactions, but the underlying insight remains remarkably similar. The body is not a fixed object. It is a process, a dynamic system held together temporarily by countless interdependent activities. Understanding this begins to shift the way we see aging. Instead of viewing it as a cruel interruption of youth, we start to see it as the natural continuation of processes that have always been present. The same mechanisms that allowed the body to grow, develop, and adapt during childhood and adulthood are the very mechanisms that eventually lead to decline. Growth and decay are not separate forces. They are two expressions of the same biological reality. Consider a tree growing in a forest. In its early years, it expands rapidly, sending roots deep into the soil and branches toward the sunlight. As it matures, its growth slows, and subtle signs of aging appear in its bark and leaves. Yet the processes that sustain the tree, cell division, nutrient transport, energy production, remain active throughout its life. The difference is only in balance. Over time, repair becomes slower than wear, renewal weaker than breakdown. The human body follows a similar pattern. During youth, regeneration outpaces deterioration. Energy feels abundant, and the body quickly recovers from stress. But as decades pass, the balance gradually shifts. The forces of repair can no longer fully keep up with the forces of entropy that affect all physical systems. What is most important to realize is that this transformation is not personal. Aging is not happening to you as an individual punishment or failure. It is happening because the body itself is part of the natural world, governed by the same laws that shape every living organism. From the Buddhist perspective, recognizing this truth is deeply liberating. When we cling to the idea that the body should remain young, strong, and unchanged, we create an internal struggle with reality. Every wrinkle becomes a reminder of loss. Every physical limitation feels like a threat to identity. The mind resists what cannot be resisted. But when we understand the body as rupa, a temporary arrangement of physical conditions, the story changes. The body becomes something to care for, to respect, and to observe, rather than something to possess permanently. This perspective does not encourage neglect of the body. On the contrary, it invites a deeper appreciation of its fragile and extraordinary nature. When we see the body as a complex and ever-changing process, we begin to value the present moment of health and vitality more fully. Each breath, each movement, each sensation becomes part of a living system that is constantly evolving. Aging then becomes a kind of teacher. It reminds us that physical form is never stable, never secure, never truly owned. The body we call mine is actually a temporary collaboration of trillions of microscopic lives working together for a brief period of time. And as we continue exploring the five aggregates, we will discover that this impermanence does not belong only to the body. Just as the physical form changes through cellular decay and renewal, the mental dimensions of our experience are also shifting continuously. In the next stage of our journey, we will turn inward, from the visible changes of the body to the more subtle transformations of the mind. Because aging does not only reshape our physical form, it also transforms the way we feel, perceive, remember, and respond to the world around us. When we think about aging, the image that usually comes to mind is physical change. We imagine gray hair, wrinkles, slower movement, and the gradual weakening of the body. Yet if we observe life carefully, we begin to notice that aging is not only happening in the body. It is also unfolding quietly within the mind. Our emotions change, our perceptions evolve, our habits deepen, and the way we interpret the world becomes different from what it once was. The person we were 10 or 20 years ago did not simply have a younger body. They also had a different mind. This is where the analysis of the five aggregates becomes particularly illuminating. After the physical body, which is described as rupa, the Buddha identified three aggregates that shape our inner experience: feeling, perception, and mental formations. These are known respectively as Vedana, Sana, and Sakra. Together, they form the constantly shifting landscape of the human mind. To understand how aging affects the mind, we must first understand how these processes operate in everyday life. Every moment we are alive, we are experiencing sensations, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. The warmth of sunlight on the skin, the sound of a voice we love, the discomfort of fatigue, the subtle tension of worry. These immediate tones of experience are what the Buddha described as feeling, or Vedana. They arise automatically whenever the senses come into contact with the world. But feelings do not exist in isolation. Almost instantly, the mind begins to interpret them. It recognizes shapes, sounds, and patterns. It identifies faces, objects, memories, and meanings. This act of recognition is what the Buddha called perception, or sana. Without perception, the world would appear as an incomprehensible stream of colors, sounds, and sensations. Perception organizes that stream into something we can understand. Then, following perception, another layer of activity emerges. The mind begins to react. It forms intentions, preferences, judgments, and emotional responses. It decides whether to approach or avoid, whether to speak or remain silent, whether to hold on or let go. These responses, shaped by past experiences and habits, are what the Buddha described as mental formations, or sakra. Together, these three processes, feeling, perception, and mental formations, create the psychological experience we call my mind. Yet, just like the physical body, these mental processes are not fixed. They evolve continuously throughout life. When we were children, our feelings were often intense and immediate. A small disappointment could bring tears. A simple pleasure could create overwhelming excitement. The mind had not yet developed the layers of understanding and experience that gradually emerge over time. Perception was also simpler. The world appeared fresh, mysterious, and sometimes confusing because the mind had not yet formed stable categories for interpreting it. As we grow older, these mental processes gradually transform. Perception becomes more refined because the brain accumulates vast libraries of memory and experience. We recognize patterns more quickly. We understand social cues more easily. Situations that once seemed puzzling become familiar. But this refinement comes with another change as well. The mind begins to develop habits. Repeated experiences shape mental pathways, reinforcing certain emotional responses and patterns of thinking. These habitual tendencies are part of what the Buddha described as sakra, the formations that condition our reactions to life. Over time, these formations can become deeply rooted. A person who repeatedly responds to stress with anger may find that anger arises more easily in the future. Someone who cultivates patience and kindness may discover that compassion becomes a natural response. The mind gradually molds itself according to the patterns it practices. This process continues throughout the lifespan, and it is profoundly influenced by aging. Modern neuroscience has shown that the brain remains plastic for much of life, meaning its structure and connections can change through experience. However, the speed and flexibility of these changes evolve with age. In youth, the brain is extraordinarily adaptable. Neural connections form quickly, allowing rapid learning and exploration. As adulthood progresses, the brain becomes more efficient but somewhat less flexible. Patterns that have been reinforced over many years become deeply embedded. This is why habits, both helpful and harmful, can feel so powerful later in life. Aging also affects memory and cognitive processing. The brain may take longer to retrieve certain pieces of information. Names might momentarily slip from awareness. New skills may require more time to master than they once did. These changes can sometimes feel frustrating, especially in a culture that prizes speed and productivity. Yet there is another side to this transformation that is often overlooked. Many studies in psychology suggest that emotional regulation actually improves with age. Older adults often experience fewer extreme emotional fluctuations and demonstrate greater resilience in the face of stress. They may not process information as rapidly as they did in youth. but they often possess a deeper ability to place experiences within a broader perspective. In other words, aging may bring a certain form of wisdom. From the perspective of Buddhist philosophy, this makes profound sense. The mind that has lived through decades of experience has encountered joy and loss, success and failure, connection and separation. These experiences gradually reveal the changing nature of life. When observed carefully, they soften the rigid expectations we once held about how the world should be. The teaching of Vedanta helps us understand that feelings are temporary waves of experience. Pleasure arises, stays briefly, and fades. Discomfort appears, intensifies, and eventually dissolves. When we are young, we often react to these feelings impulsively, chasing pleasant sensations and resisting unpleasant ones. But as the years pass, many people begin to recognize that neither pleasure nor pain lasts forever. Similarly, the aggregate of Sana reveals that the way we interpret the world is not fixed. Our perceptions shift as our understanding grows. Situations that once seemed catastrophic may later appear trivial. Events that once seemed insignificant may later reveal deeper meaning. And within Sakra we see the immense power of habit. The mind becomes what it repeatedly practices. Every moment of anger strengthens anger. Every moment of patience strengthens patience. Aging, therefore, does not merely weaken the body, it gradually reveals the patterns we have cultivated within the mind. If someone spends decades nurturing resentment, that resentment may become deeply ingrained in their later years. But if someone spends decades cultivating understanding, kindness, and mindfulness, those qualities can mature into a profound inner stability. In this way, aging becomes a mirror. It reflects the mental seeds we have planted throughout our lives. The Buddha often encouraged his followers to observe these mental processes carefully. By watching feelings arise and pass away, by noticing how perception labels experience, and by recognizing how habits shape reactions, we begin to see that the mind itself is not a fixed identity. It is a dynamic system, constantly influenced by causes and conditions. This realization can be both humbling and liberating. Humbling because it reveals that much of what we call my personality is actually a collection of conditioned patterns. Liberating because it means those patterns can change. Even as the body ages, the mind still holds the capacity for understanding and transformation. And yet there is one more layer of experience that remains to be explored. Beneath feeling, perception, and mental formations lies the very awareness through which all experiences are known. It is the knowing of sight, sound, thought, and emotion. It is what allows the mind to recognize that it is thinking, feeling, remembering. In the framework of the Five Aggregates, this final dimension is known as consciousness. And when we examine consciousness closely, we may discover something even more surprising about the nature of aging and the mysterious process we call the self. If we continue this journey inward beyond the body, beyond feelings, beyond perception and mental habits, we arrive at something even more subtle and mysterious, awareness itself. There is something within our experience that knows the body, knows the emotions, knows the thoughts. It is the simple fact that we are conscious. When a sound is heard, it is known. When a memory appears, it is known. When a feeling of joy or sadness arises, it too is known. Because of this knowing, many people throughout history have believed that consciousness must be the true self, the unchanging observer living inside the body. It is easy to understand why this belief feels convincing. The body clearly changes, as we have already seen. Feelings fluctuate from moment to moment. Perceptions shift with experience. Habits form and dissolve over time. But consciousness seems different. It appears to be the stable background against which all these changes occur. When we look back at childhood memories, it feels as though the same I that once saw the world through the eyes of a child is now seeing the world through the eyes of an adult. The body has changed dramatically, the mind has matured, yet the sense of being aware appears continuous. However, the Buddha's analysis of the Five Aggregates challenges this assumption in a profound way. The fifth aggregate, known as Vaya, does not refer to a permanent observer or an eternal soul. Instead, it describes a process, something that arises moment by moment in dependence on conditions. To understand this, we can begin with a simple observation. Consciousness does not exist in isolation. It always appears together with an object. When there is a visible form and functioning eyes, visual consciousness arises and we see. When there is a sound and functioning ears, auditory consciousness arises and we hear. When a thought appears in the mind, mental consciousness arises and the thought is known. In other words, consciousness is always tied to a specific moment of contact between the senses and the world. If the conditions for that contact disappear, the corresponding consciousness disappears as well. When the eyes close in complete darkness, visual consciousness fades. When sound stops, auditory consciousness fades. During deep sleep, when sensory input and mental activity become minimal, the vivid experience of waking awareness dissolves almost entirely. Consciousness is therefore not a single continuous entity, but a sequence of events arising again and again. Imagine a candle flame. At first glance, the flame appears stable, as though it were the same flame burning continuously. But if we observe carefully, we realize that the flame is actually a rapid process of fuel burning and new energy emerging. The flame of one moment is not exactly the same flame of the next moment, yet because the changes occur so quickly, the mind perceives continuity. Consciousness functions in a similar way. Each moment of awareness arises due to specific conditions and then fades, replaced by the next moment. The stream appears continuous, but it is actually composed of countless individual moments of knowing. As we age, this process of consciousness also changes in subtle ways. The senses that feed consciousness gradually transform. Vision may become less sharp. Hearing may lose some of its sensitivity. The speed at which the brain processes information may slow slightly. These changes influence how consciousness operates because consciousness depends on the sensory and neurological systems that support it. But the most important insight is not that consciousness changes with age. The deeper insight is that consciousness has always been changing, even during youth. The difference is that aging makes this truth more visible. When a person is young and energetic, the rapid functioning of the senses and the mind creates the impression of a powerful and stable awareness. Thoughts move quickly, attention jumps from one object to another, and the mind feels vibrant. But as the years pass and the pace of mental activity slows slightly, it becomes easier to observe that awareness itself is not fixed. It is simply a flow of moments arising and passing. This observation leads directly to one of the most radical teachings in Buddhism, the principle of anatta. According to this teaching, there is no permanent, unchanging self hidden within the body or the mind. What we call the self is actually the combined functioning of the five aggregates: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, each arising and dissolving continuously. This does not mean that a person does not exist in any meaningful sense. Rather, it means that what we call a person is a process rather than a fixed entity. It is like a river flowing through time. The water within the river is never the same from one moment to the next, yet the river maintains a recognizable form. In the same way, the human experience unfolds as a dynamic stream of changing conditions. The body ages, feelings fluctuate, perceptions shift, habits evolve, and consciousness flickers from moment to moment. The sense of a solid I emerges from this ongoing interplay, much like a melody emerging from the vibration of musical notes. Aging therefore reveals something extraordinary about our existence. It slowly dissolves the illusion of permanence that the mind tries so hard to maintain. When we are young, we often believe that our abilities, our identity, and even our relationships will remain stable. Life feels predictable. But as time moves forward, reality gently contradicts these assumptions. The body changes whether we wish it or not. Memories fade or transform. People we love move in different directions. Circumstances evolve in ways we could never have predicted. Each of these changes quietly whispers the same truth: nothing within the human experience remains fixed. For many people, this realization initially creates fear. If there is no permanent self, if even consciousness itself is a flowing process, then what exactly are we? What remains when everything is changing? The Buddha did not present this insight as a reason for despair. Instead, he offered it as a path toward freedom. Much of human suffering arises from trying to hold on to what cannot be held. We cling to youth even as the body ages. We cling to identity even as the mind evolves. We cling to the idea of a permanent self even as every part of experience demonstrates change. When we begin to see clearly that the five aggregates are processes rather than possessions, something in the mind relaxes. The struggle to preserve a fixed identity softens. The fear of change loses some of its intensity. Life becomes less about defending a permanent me, and more about understanding the flow of conditions that create experience. Aging then becomes not an enemy but a teacher. It gradually exposes the truth that was always present but rarely noticed. Every wrinkle, every shift in memory, every transformation of awareness points to the same underlying reality. The self we cling to is not a solid object but a living process unfolding moment by moment. And once we begin to see this clearly, an entirely new relationship with life becomes possible. Instead of resisting the changes that come with time, we can learn to observe them with curiosity and wisdom. The body may grow older, the mind may evolve, and consciousness may continue its moment-to-moment dance, but the understanding of these processes can deepen with every passing year. In the final part of our exploration, we will look at how this understanding transforms the meaning of aging itself. Because when we truly see the impermanent nature of the body and mind, aging is no longer simply a story of decline. It becomes a doorway to insight, a reminder of the most fundamental law of existence. As we reach the final stage of this reflection, a remarkable realization begins to emerge. What we have explored so far is not merely a theory about aging, nor simply a philosophical interpretation of life. It is an invitation to see reality more clearly. When we examine the body through the lens of biology, and the mind through the framework of the five aggregates, something slowly becomes undeniable. Aging is not a mistake in the system of life. It is a direct expression of the deepest law governing all conditioned existence. In the teachings of Gautama Buddha, this law is known as anicca. Impermanence does not simply mean that things eventually change. It means that change is happening continuously, in every moment, at every level of reality. The body is changing at the cellular level. The mind is changing through feelings, perceptions, and habits. Even consciousness itself arises and fades moment by moment. What appears stable is actually a flowing process, much like a river whose waters are never the same from one second to the next. Aging, therefore, is not something that suddenly begins at middle age or old age. Aging has been unfolding since the first moment life appeared. The infant growing into a child, the child becoming an adult, the adult gradually entering later years. All of these are simply different phases of the same continuous transformation. Youth is not the opposite of aging. Youth is the earliest stage of it. When we begin to understand this deeply, our relationship with aging can change dramatically. For most people, aging is associated with fear. We fear losing strength, losing beauty, losing independence, losing the identities we have built around ourselves. Society reinforces these fears by constantly glorifying youth and treating aging as something to resist or conceal. Anti-aging products promise to slow time. Advertisements celebrate the image of eternal vitality. The message is subtle but powerful: aging is something to fight against. Yet the more we struggle against aging, the more tension we create within ourselves. Time does not negotiate with desire. No matter how strongly we wish to remain the same, the body continues its quiet transformation. Hair turns gray, skin changes, energy shifts. The mind may become calmer in some ways and slower in others. Each of these changes reflects the same universal truth: everything that arises must eventually evolve. From the perspective of wisdom, aging becomes something very different from what we once believed. Instead of being an enemy, it becomes a teacher, one of the most honest teachers we will ever encounter. It reveals the reality of impermanence not through abstract ideas, but through direct experience. Every wrinkle on the skin is a reminder that form is temporary. Every shift in memory reveals that perception is changing. Every transformation in our emotional patterns shows that mental formations are not fixed. Even the subtle changes in awareness point to the fact that consciousness itself is a process rather than a permanent observer. Seen in this way, aging becomes a kind of mirror held up to the truth of existence. It reflects the impermanent nature of all things. But here is the surprising part of this insight. When we stop resisting impermanence, a new form of peace begins to emerge. Much of the suffering associated with aging comes not from the changes themselves, but from the mind's resistance to those changes. We cling to images of who we once were. We compare the present moment with an idealized past. We measure our worth against standards that belong to youth. This resistance creates a sense of loss, as though life were gradually taking something away from us. Yet if we look more carefully, life is not only taking away, it is also revealing. With each passing year, we gain experiences that were impossible to possess before. We begin to see patterns in life that younger minds cannot yet recognize. We learn that many things we once believed to be permanent were never meant to last. Relationships change, ambitions evolve, priorities shift. Slowly, the mind begins to understand that holding too tightly to any particular moment of life leads to disappointment. This understanding can give rise to a quiet form of wisdom. Wisdom does not mean knowing every answer or achieving perfect control over life. It means seeing things as they truly are. When we recognize the impermanent nature of the body and mind, we stop expecting them to behave as though they were permanent. Instead of demanding that youth lasts forever, we begin to appreciate the fleeting beauty of each stage of life. Youth has its energy and exploration. Adulthood has its responsibility and creativity. Later years often bring reflection, patience, and perspective. Each stage carries its own gifts as well as its challenges. When we accept the flow of life rather than resisting it, these stages become chapters of a single unfolding story rather than a battle against time. There is also another profound transformation that can occur when we see aging clearly. The fear of death begins to soften. For many people, death appears terrifying because it seems like a sudden end to a stable identity. If we believe that there is a permanent self inside the body, then the disappearance of that body feels like the destruction of everything we are. But the exploration of the five aggregates reveals something very different. What we call the self has never been a fixed object. It has always been a dynamic process, a combination of physical and mental events arising and fading continuously. When this becomes clear, death is no longer a mysterious interruption of permanence. It becomes part of the same continuum of change that has been unfolding throughout life. Just as childhood gave way to adulthood and adulthood gives way to old age, existence itself moves through phases according to causes and conditions. This realization does not eliminate the natural sadness that can accompany loss or separation. But it removes the illusion that life was ever meant to remain frozen in time. Instead, we begin to see life as a living process, constantly transforming, constantly moving. And perhaps this is the greatest gift that aging can offer. It gently dissolves the illusions that once dominated our thinking. It shows us that beauty is temporary, strength is temporary, identity is temporary, but it also reveals something deeper. When we stop clinging to what cannot last, the present moment becomes more vivid. Each conversation with a loved one becomes more meaningful. Each breath becomes more precious. The awareness that life is impermanent does not diminish its value. It magnifies it. Imagine watching a sunset over the ocean. The colors spread across the sky for only a brief time before fading into darkness. Yet it is precisely this fleeting nature that makes the sunset so beautiful. If the colors remained fixed forever, we might soon stop noticing them. But because they vanish, we pay attention. Life works in the same way. The fact that our time is limited gives every moment its significance. When we understand aging through the lens of the five aggregates and the law of impermanence, we begin to see that nothing is truly being lost. The body transforms, the mind evolves, and the stream of experience continues its unfolding. What disappears are the illusions that once caused confusion and fear. In their place, something quieter but far more stable can arise, understanding. And with understanding comes a new way of living. Instead of clinging to the past or fearing the future, we learn to meet each moment with awareness. The body may grow older, but the capacity for insight can deepen. The mind may slow in certain ways, but it can also become more spacious, more compassionate, more at peace with the changing nature of existence. Aging, then, is not merely the closing chapter of life. It is one of the most profound opportunities for awakening to the truth that has always been present. The truth that everything changes. And when we finally see this clearly, we realize that peace was never found by stopping time. Peace is found by understanding it.